This is Barry Zalma speaking on Zalma on Insurance on YouTube. We are continuing with the story of arson-for-profit. This is part 2. After the fire was extinguished, the arson investigators completed their investigations. The firefighters overhauled the scene to make sure all of the fire was out. The eldest son, who had been injured in the fire, met with his father, who told him he had failed in his obligation and had not totally destroyed the house and had to return to totally destroy what was left after the firefighters. Having been once burned, the young man only took one 5-gallon can of gasoline with him, poured it around the debris and the materials that were not damaged, and set the fire again. The fire department arrived, extinguished the fire, which left almost nothing of the structure and its contents, and called it a rekindle. That means the fire restarted on its own, and therefore didn't call back the arson investigators. The next day, Monday, the young man got on an airplane and flew back to Yerevan, Armenia, to spend some time with his grandmother and to allow the burns on his face and to let his eyebrows grow back. He would be there for at least 3 months before he was fully healed and could return to the United States. The Armenian gentleman and his Armenian insurance broker then reported the claim to the London insurers and the American insurer. The London insurers immediately hired an experienced professional insurance adjuster and private investigator, who immediately scheduled a meeting with the Armenian gentleman and interviewed him with the assistance of an Armenian interpreter and a certified court reporter while sitting around the swimming pool, which was still full of debris. The interview lasted for 2 to 3 hours, hundreds of pages, and raised multiple red flags in the mind of the investigator. At that time in the 1980s, before the existence of cellular telephones, the adjuster, being a consummate professional, had a radio telephone, which he first used to contact the underwriters in London and obtain permission to retain counsel. The next telephone call he made was to me, and I was retained as attorneys for the underwriters and eventually for the insurance company who insured the home. The investigation began in earnest. The entire underwriting file from London was delivered by messenger and reviewed in detail. And unlike the underwriters who had accepted the risk, the first thing I noticed on reviewing the appraisals and schedule of fine arts and jewelry was that the appraiser and the underwriters had misspelled the word porcelain and had misspelled the word Fabergé. That fact was highly unusual. Investigation began in earnest. Based on my recommendations and his own initiative, the investigator first obtained a detailed recorded statement from the broker, and a complete copy of the broker's file. Photographs taken by the insured were collected. A fine arts appraiser was retained, and it became obvious that with the assistance of the fine arts appraiser, the appraisal of the fine arts seemed to be highly overestimated and overvalued. In addition, a fire cause and origin investigator was retained to work with the LA City Fire Department arson unit to determine the cause and origin of the fire. It became clear that the fire was caused by the use of gasoline, that it was intentionally set, and that the rekindle was not a rekindle, but was in fact an additional arson used to totally destroy the contents. All of the contents that survived, as shards of pottery and bits of metal, were collected and stored in a storage facility with seals upon it to make sure that they were not tampered with. It became clear that attempts were being made to defraud the insurers, and on my recommendation, the insurers agreed to allow me to examine under oath the insured. The policy of insurance, of course, contained a set language that is basic to the standard fire insurance policy that allows an insurer to appoint anyone to take the examination under oath of an insured and require the insured to produce documents. The examinations under oath began about 2 months after the fire at the residence that the homeowner's insurer had paid to rent as a part of the additional living expense coverage for the insured and his family. For his convenience, we had with us a certified court reporter and an Armenian language interpreter certified by the Los Angeles court system. The interview began in his house, and he began at 9 in the morning drinking a very strange looking orange juice. It was not really orange, but sort of brown, and he admitted that the orange juice he was drinking was half orange juice and half Armenian brandy that he called cognac. While the interview in the first day of the examination under oath continued, we started to count as he took down 8-ounce glasses of this mixture. And the witness continued to be totally sober, answered all my questions coherently, while having consumed at least 6 glasses of Armenian brandy and orange juice in the first 4 hours of the examination. We broke for lunch, and the interview continued after lunch, having insulted him by not eating the food that his wife had made, because it would have been improper to actually eat with them. It became clear after the first day that although the witness was an alcoholic who could consume a great deal of brandy without losing his capacity to walk in a straight line. He also had a great deal of difficulty telling the truth. We learned, for instance, that the appraisal was performed by an auctioneer who, because the insured was in a hurry, gave his notes to the insured and signed blank appraisal forms that were later typed up by the 13-year-old son, who allegedly was an A student. That's probably why the word porcelain was misspelled. The appraisal also contained the description of a scene of ocean surf by the great Armenian artist Ayvazovsky, and a portrait by an artist called Sarah Moon. Unfortunately for the insured, I was also retained by the insurer for a publishing company that published Sarah Moon paintings, and the originals were about 6 feet by 4 feet and were cut down by a photographic process so that they could be published as a 10 by 12 print that was sold in basic grocery stores, pharmacies for $1 a print. The Sarah Moon paintings, I had about 10,000 of the prints in salvage because they'd been smoke damaged, sold originally for $1 and were appraised as an oil painting for $1,500. Once we knew that, there was no question that fraud had been attempted. The examination under oath, because of the need for an interpreter, lasted approximately 8 separate days. One day was cut short as a half day because the insured became insulted and attempted to attack me physically, only to be stopped by his lawyer, who jumped between us. Perhaps the alcohol consumption got to him. On the last day of the examination under oath, after having established that the statements made on the application for insurance to the underwriters and to the homeowner's insurer about no prior claims and no prior cancellations were false, I asked the question I always ask at the end of an examination under oath. I said, "Sir, did you set fire to your home?" He looked at me. After 8 days of examination at 7 o'clock at night, the last question I was to ask, and he said with a straight face, "Yes." His lawyer smiled and giggled. My court reporter had her hands over her keyboard waiting for the interpretation, because she was well trained to never write down what the insured witness said in English, but only what the interpreter said. And eventually we learned that in Armenian the word, quote, "yes," close quote, means me, and what he was really saying was who me. The examination under oath ended, the investigation completed, and the underwriters and the homeowner's insurer rejected the claim in its entirety and advised the insured that the policy had been rescinded from its inception because of material misrepresentations of fact and concealment of material facts, since the evidence we had gathered established that the insured had, on the day he signed the application for insurance, received a payment from his homeowner's insurer for damage caused by windstorm to his roof of almost $16,000, that his homeowner's insurer was required to defend a landslide claim from the downhill neighbor, that his wife's policy of health insurance had been rescinded by the insurer because at the time she applied for the insurance, they failed to report her existing breast cancer, and because the appraisal itself was a total fraud, and that the appraiser, on being interviewed before the denial of the claim, admitted that it appeared that the witness's son, when he typed up the appraisal, added 1 or 2 zeros to every item claimed. The insurers denied the claim and were, of course, sued for bad faith. The case took 5 years to resolve in the Los Angeles County Superior Court, and eventually the trial court granted a motion for summary judgment based on the rescission of the policy. The court opinion was appealed and affirmed by the Court of Appeal, and has now become what I believe to be the key rescission decision in the state of California. If you wish to read the opinion, send me an email and I'll be glad to send you a citation where you can read the opinion. The key learned from this case is that although the Armenian gentleman and his broker were very good at creating a crime, that they really understood how, with the help of the terrorist organization they were working with, to set a fire and destroy a house without any evidence that it had been performed by the insured. They had very little experience or knowledge of insurance law, and that the use of a experienced, well-trained, knowledgeable investigator and an insurance coverage counsel who understood the law in the state of California, once it was established through examination under oath and later in deposition that the insured had intentionally misrepresented material facts by claiming on his application for insurance that he had never incurred an insurance claim, had never incurred a loss without a claim, had never been canceled or non-renewed by a prior insurer, and the collection of evidence from those insurers who had canceled his policy in the past because the adjuster on his water damage claim, having seen the insured's contents and the way he failed to upkeep his home, caused the insurer to immediately cancel or non-renew the policy, that he has had a policy rescinded by a prior insurer, that he had several claims that were paid by his prior insurer, and 2 or 3 losses that were not insured and not caused as a claim. We also found he had approximately 150 lawsuits filed in California courts, even though he had only been in the United States for 7 years. He was a serial litigator and basically a very bad man. At the end of the lawsuit, he was required to repay the insurer all the money that was advanced by the homeowner's insurer for his additional living expense, and to pay the underwriters at Lloyd's every dollar they had spent on their lawyers and investigators to prove there was no claim. Since in California only an insured can receive damages for bad faith, the insurer was only entitled to recover contract damages, that is, the money they spent, although they should have recovered for the intentional fraudulent acts of the insured. He didn't give up. After he lost, he sued the adjuster for losing the debris that was kept in the Beacon's storage facility. That lawsuit took another 3 years to resolve, and eventually he paid the adjuster for malicious prosecution of his claim. Sometimes, even in an arson-for-profit, justice is done, and in this case it was. This is Barry Zalma. Zalma on Insurance for YouTube. Please, if you're interested in this type of case, consider acquiring my book, Insurance Fraud, or my book, Insurance Claims, available through my website or through Amazon.com as both a Kindle book and a paperback.